Hello, I'm Rob, the Dungeon Tutor. I'm Rob, the Dungeon Tutor. Rob, the Dungeon Tutor. I'm the Dungeon Tutor. And I'm Rob, the Dungeon Tutor. Thanks for joining me. Hello, friends. I am Rob, the Dungeon Tutor. Welcome to this little tale that I spin for you. This, of course, is a session in its own way, talking about how I tried to do something that some game masters would say is crazy, impossible, would not work, but it has, very successfully. And I thought I would pass on the secrets of how I did it to you, just in case you find yourself in a circumstance where some of this might prove useful to you, or in case you ever want to try this for yourself. Now, full disclosure, this was done to a purpose. This was not just something I just randomly decided to do. Because I know that there's a lot of players who would have a difficult time with this, might not enjoy it, and there's certainly game masters who would quail at this idea. But my idea was this. I took a group, brand new, and before anybody came in, I gave them the premise of what I was going to try to do and made sure they were all okay with it. And they were, because I had a mixed blend of players. I had people with a fair amount of experience, especially playing one or two different games, but haven't played a lot of role-playing games, just a couple. I had one person who's played quite a few, and they were intrigued by the concept. I had people who were brand new to role-playing games, and so they had nothing to base on and no reason to say no. A couple of them even showed enthusiasm for the idea, so this is what I did. So, my premise is quite simple. To play a multitude of role-playing games in very short bursts to teach certain gaming skills. I've noticed that a lot of players they have a style and they stick to it and they get comfortable with it. I think that's unfortunately a disservice for some people, because having a variety of different styles and being exposed to different ways of playing can make a person a stronger gamer in general. So, this was how I did it and why I did it. I'll explain as I go. So anyhow, the first game... Oh, one other thing too. It's also because I want to play a lot of other games. I don't have a problem with Dungeons & Dragons, but it's not all I ever want to play. And while I like to veer off and play some Shadowrun from time to time, I rarely find myself, with the kind of time and sometimes just the group to play some of these novelty games that I've gotten, or games that I'm just interested in dipping my toe in, finding out how they work. It's a lot to ask for a group that's used to long, years-long campaigns. So, for people who do those kind of games and love those kind of campaigns, this is a bit much of an ask, but brand new group didn't have a problem with that. So, what did I do? After I got the group together, and not all of them, they hadn't met each other really yet, that very first time we all sat down together, I pulled out a game. I had Ghostbusters, 1986. Why Ghostbusters? Two reasons. Number one, the character creation is incredibly simple. Characters are just made up of 4 basic stats. You don't roll for anything, you just come up with them. You pick your skills, 1 skill for each stat, a la carte. I named them all in front of everybody, and everybody got to pick one. This is, we had a brief introduction, but this is it. They didn't know each other's playstyle or anything, so we just did that to make the characters. Number 2, it's a comedy game. This is to get them into the mindset that, sometimes failing is fun. And sometimes you'll laugh at other people's misfortunes, they'll laugh at yours, and it's a bonding experience. Not a bad one. So with Ghostbusters, it's also culturally recognizable. It was culturally relevant because the 2016 Ghostbusters had been out. The new Ghostbusters movie, Ghostbusters Afterlife, was threatened to come out repeatedly. So it's not like people didn't know or didn't remember Ghostbusters. And everybody had seen the first 2 movies, I'm fairly certain. So it was a fine way to start out. I created the adventure. I set it in our hometown to bring immersion to as much as I could so everybody could use the knowledge of the town that we live in, the city of Fond du Lac, as their basis for how they could realistically go about accomplishing things. I spun time up so that they had smartphones and things like that, and thought about how that would change things. Did not advance the technology at all. So I could use all the materials inside this box. Just said that they stuck with what was tried and true, even though I know, yeah, all the later stuff shows that they do develop their products and materials and gear. But this is recognizable. The system is already pretty robust with some neat little tools, including cards for all of your equipment, and a very simple equipping mechanic so that your characters can only have so many things. One person can't have everything in the book. And it worked. It worked really well. The adventure that I spun out was a fairly simple, obviously fictional. I created just about everything. And I had a very simple premise. A foe the characters would find and could not just beat. Could not just zap with the neutrino wands and trap. There was something more they had to do. They would get chased out of the house after their first confrontation. But I set it as a classic haunted house, a Victorian mansion, all that, and had been abandoned, gone through several hands, ghost scary. Somebody wants to get the ghost out, they call Ghostbusters, a brand new franchise with all these youngins who don't have any real experience, but hey, they've got a franchise and they've got gear from Ghostbusters International. So, that was the basic premise. It was very simple. It was not incredibly deep. I made a total of 5 characters. And then in that, I also made one warm-up encounter for them so they could get used to the mechanics. The house that they chose as their base was haunted. It was given to them as their base, I should say. It was haunted already, so they got to zap that ghost. Everybody was on par with how the mechanics work. I think that's very important when you're introducing people to a new system. Absolutely. I think they did that in the very first session. After that, they got to the haunted house. The premise was spelled out in front of them. They went to the place. I created a wrinkle because I absolutely, personally, not a huge fan of ghost hunting and all of that. I know it's kind of trendy and stuff, but I just kind of look askance at it. And I'm a skeptic, so, yeah. But it's fun to play with concepts, right? So I had a ghost hunting team on site that was getting in the way. They were kind of a nuisance. Plus, I had to have an EPA guy, actually from the DNR, Wisconsin. The Department of Natural Resources is pretty powerful. I had a guy from the DNR come in and protest their being around. Eugene Nettle. I made him as annoying as possible. So they got to see all these things. They had a foil. They had an obstacle that they had to overcome. And then eventually, they got into the scrap of the ghost. The ghost did not make itself obvious at first. It chose to attack using supernatural things, poltergeist effects, emotion control, fear. And it was able to levy several such attacks on the group at a time and create a very chaotic, but at the same time whimsical mode where nobody was in danger of dying. But everybody wanted to do something that could help out. Everybody didn't know that they couldn't win at that particular point because the ghost was too strong. And a whole bunch of things happened, including to the ghost hunters. They were oftentimes the thing that was laid out before them to show that, yeah, these things can happen to you. So they had some warning and they had some time to play. They got to use all their various skills. They did some classic blunders. They split up repeatedly, and frequently they were in a position where it's like, oh yeah, information gathering skills could be really, really helpful here. And their first attempt at just trying to use the technology they had and bull rush through the encounter did not work. They got ejected from the place and they realized, it's too strong for us. We need to find out a way to weaken the ghost or to find out what its weakness is. So they went and did research, which is actually a pretty big part of this game. Now, this was the first time I'd ever run Ghostbusters, and I have a pretty good idea of what comedy games mean. It means that scary things are scary, but they don't leave lasting marks. You can bash somebody up pretty good, but outright brutality is not really funny. So when something happens to a person, it's funny usually. It might be humiliating, not cruel, and usually nothing that is lethal. Threaten, but don't necessarily use, big things to attack. When the ghost finally showed itself, which was their cue to leave, it was huge. It had big, nasty, pointy teeth, and they zapped it, and it did nothing. And that's when they realized they had to get out of there. They fought that, but they did. They got away. So, the group all chose different things to do to respond, as was their idiom. This is how I knew my group was pretty solid. They were in character, and they did things as their characters would do. The ladies of the group went off and did research at the City Annex building. Others checked the grounds where there didn't seem to be any threats, and they found a vital clue as I had left there, which was really cool. And eventually they all kind of got together and they realized, hey, we kind of know the identity of the ghost, or ghosts, because there were 3 of them. We also know something about their personalities, and if that ghost is actually 3 ghosts, the way to beat them might be to pull them apart and get them fighting with each other. Which they did, and it worked out spectacularly. They came up with a great plan, which a few hints is all it really took for me, and they jumped on this plan and worked together, planned out things using everybody's skills and abilities, and it was great. And when they finally beat that ghost, there was even a fun little thing at the end that the ghost of the person who had actually murdered the 3 girls, who were the monster, was stuck in that house, trapped with them, and always hiding away from them, trying to stay out of notice of them because they were much more powerful in their rage, and he was just a small, petty man. So, they even got to throw him in with the girls, which was, they enjoyed that quite a bit. So, we successfully got through a game of Ghostbusters. It took 3 sessions, as was pretty much what I had intended. I was ready to go up to 4. I could have stopped it at 2, but, you let the scenes build, and you let them play with all of the different things that the game allows. Allow them to use the various skills. Use brownie points to survive and achieve beyond what you normally can. And they did a great job, I thought. Fantastic. I had a really good feeling about the group after that, and they kind of got to know each other's little peccadillos a little bit more. They kind of got to know style and what certain people liked in a game. They all really liked Ghostbusters. They thought it was fun. But that being said, I was ready to introduce them to something a little bit more gripping than that. So after Ghostbusters, they were all interested to see what the next thing was going to be. The next one is I introduced them to a game that I'm very familiar with, Dungeons & Dragons. This is just Dungeons & Dragons, not first edition, second edition, third edition. No, this is just Dungeons & Dragons. This was how I got into the hobby. And I let them make up characters. The character creation for this game is very simple. I just had them all rolling dice with a blank character sheet in front of them. They made choices based on what they rolled, and then equipped them all out, and that took a total of about a half an hour, maybe an hour. And for this, I also bent another one of my personal feelings. We were doing a game that I'm familiar with, but I actually took out a module, and I've got quite a few modules lying around. I don't run modules usually. I don't. I came into the hobby making everything. And through most of my career, I made most of the adventures that I ran. No, I couldn't tell you a great deal about most of them. I didn't do a very good job making notes. I have a bundle of collections and fond memories and things, but I couldn't tell you what all of these were. But this one, I used a module, Castle Caldwell and Beyond. I thought it was a decent starting adventure. It had a dungeon straight off, so the party had something they could do. And at the same time, they could kind of learn how to dungeon crawl. Learn how to feel you're in a space that's enclosed and could be very dangerous from any side. Monsters could come at you from anywhere. Wandering monsters can come after you. But there's treasure to be had there too, so that's why you quest. Or in their case, they were paid to clear the place out. I'll just say this: Castle Caldwell and Beyond, not a very good adventure. It's really not. I wouldn't recommend anybody going out and looking for it. It's very bare bones and not very interesting. But it was a good tutorial on dungeon crawling for them. So, they played it. There's a couple lessons they learned. They learned, again, always look up. Use the fact that you can do anything you say, and then we can work out the rules on how it works, but there's no perception checks. There's no safety net that you could just roll a die and figure something out. No, you have to do things. You have to say you're doing things and try different things. And we learned about character death. We had 2 characters die. One, a thief who died to a trap they didn't look for. Boy, I think he learned that lesson pretty well. The other one, he's actually become a little more hesitant as a result, but yeah, that's learning. The other one was just somebody who died in an extended fight, and they were kind of stuck for it. So, regrettable? Possibly, but, you know, these characters, they're so easy to make that if a character dies, you roll up another character and just move on, and that's what we did. The game went well. As a matter of fact, one of my players really has continued to say that was one of the favorite ones of his that we've tried. And it was fine. We actually extended it out and played the second level because there was multiple adventures within. They cleared the upper level and then they cleared the lower level and had a little bit more fun dungeon crawling. And I got to be a little over the top with some of the creatures, and they had some memorable encounters. And by the time it was done, I thought, you know, we had covered dungeon crawling and early old school Dungeons and Dragons pretty well by that time. It was ready to do something new, and boy did we. The next one was The Princess Bride, the role-playing game. Again, I have never played this game. Why would I never have played this game? Because I love The Princess Bride, the movie. It was so good. Rob Reiner did such a good job with that. All the cast was so excellent. Amazing movie. But the role-playing game is based on Fudge. Which, if you're not familiar with Fudge, its latest incarnation is called Fate. That evil hat basically took the mechanics and they tightened everything down, and they have an excellent game. That is really not my style. It doesn't have a lot of crunch, almost none. It has very few mechanics, and the dice system is very granular. I'll just say this. There aren't a lot of different outcomes for any time you roll the dice, and the swing is based on where your character's relative skill is. I don't have a problem with it mechanically. It's fine, and it does a decent job at what it wants to do, which is to tell a story. I've just never really had a lot of use for it. But now I'm going to run a game based on this. So I did some reading, which switching game systems is really helpful to get your reading count up. And this I knew was going to be a bit more of a challenge, because this requires your players to cooperate with you. I lied when I said I'd never run this before. I tried running it once and it was an abysmal failure, because my players did not buy into the whole idea of helping to drive the story. They waited for me to say everything and then they just reacted. And really, that's not what this game shines at. This game is really good if your players imagine themselves in the role and look forward to their moments in the spotlight to do something or say something cool. Would the original movie have been so good if those roles weren't so well acted out? I mean, you could imagine they could have gotten some just thug, large man to do Fezzik, the giant, but they didn't. They had Andre the Giant with a heart and a charm and a personality, and is just rolled throughout and made everything better. Without Cary Elwes's delivery as Wesley, he was absolutely brilliant, just the perfect person in that role. All of them brought that next level to the characters, and you really need that to make this game work. If the characters are passive, if they don't interject some personality, and they don't bring some liveliness to the thing, the game is going to fall flat. And it's a danger, really, if only one or two people really are, that they're going to steal the entire show. Because they're going to be the ones that are doing the things, and they're going to do more complicated things, and everyone else is just going to plug along, and I move forward and I attack. It would be a real shame for something like this. Now, this is the third game in about as many months as we played, so I needed to change the approach. I went with pre-generated characters. This game uses templates. I just picked the sample templates and more than I had players to give everybody a choice on what they had without feeling like the last person at the table got shoehorned into one role and had no choice. Each character also got a background that set them into the story. Nothing too complicated, but all of them had something that described how their passions of the characters were stoked, so that the players had something they could latch on to as a purpose for what they were doing. So, for instance, the agent, the person who was in the Vicini role, he was actually from Gilder, the rival nation, and he was sent there specifically to take out a Gilder turncoat who was turned raider and robber, a very skilled person, and that was his job to make sure that woman died. So that was, pretty driven, considering he didn't have himself the skills to really pull that off. He needed to find people to do it, and he did. We had Bonk, the brute, who was the kind of Andre role. He was looking for the man who had bested him in a wrestling contest. A kind of a scrappy farm boy who turned soldier and ended up besting him, who just coincidentally happened to be the love interest of the wandering farmhand. So she was after him because she was in love with him, and they were to be wed after he was done soldiering, but he'd been captured. He went missing because of a mysterious pirate in the north. So you see how I drew everything together to make sure that these people would all be interested in going in the same direction. It's the kind of crafting and care that you need to do when you're doing these quick one-hit adventures. And I think that's exceptionally important. Pre-genning for characters that are more complicated is very important, so you don't lose an entire night in the session 0 character creation. Very important. Also, giving each character something to give them a vector to come into the story on, a reason to do things, and since you're crafting it as the game master, you can make them all dovetail together so they all want to work together, so that the story makes sense that they are working together, won't betray each other, at least not right away, and will work to accomplish their individual goals as a shared story experience. Very important. And then I started the action in action. I had two characters meet each other, and then a fight broke out. And then other people met each other, and a fight broke out. And those fights ended up meeting together because I forced motion from the fencer of the group and the pirate of the group, who had just kind of met, had the opportunity to work together, and then all of a sudden an unwinnable situation made them run away, smack into the other group, who were also being chased by their own foes, who were not the same. So when they collided, they were surrounded by enemies on both sides, but not the same enemies and not each other's enemies necessarily. So these two rivals were arguing over who gets to get whom, and in the chaos, the group got away cleverly. Let them all shine, let them introduce themselves to each other in a tense environment that would give them the catalyst they would need to decide, hey, you guys are pretty good. We should work together. Because all of them had a motivation to get out of Florence City, to get up to the North Coast, to go after their individual quarries, whoever that was. And it worked perfectly. Perfectly. And two players had to come in later which just worked out that the next session, they bumped into them on the road. They were observing a house that had a bad situation potentially, and these strangers came in and helped them out because they were also looking at the same situation. And hey, there's 4 people here who just kind of moved in. We'll make ourselves useful by popping in and just, helping out. Hey, what a coincidence. You guys are going the same direction we are. We can all work together. Now, for the story, it's the Princess Bride, right? So I had to write a different kind of story for this. It wasn't a dungeon crawl. There was no dungeon crawl involved at all. But I did have... It basically followed the plot of the movie, as I think about it. The conflict came up. They all kind of got together, fell in, traveled. They had a kind of a rise, a crescendo, and then a climax resolution when they got onto a boat to cross the Great Lake in the middle of Florin. And the way they got the boat was hilarious. They all got to use their own special idiom to progress. I noted, as not all of the players looked like they were having an equal share. The Brute seemed like he was a little standoffish and not really sure what to do with himself. We'd already had a few interesting encounters, but outside of just wrestling a bear, the Brute seemed like he was kind of having some difficulties. So they got attacked by lake pirates, and the lake pirate was the foil to the Brute. It was a lady pirate. She was immense, his size, and they got to have a fight. And he ended up pile driving her and winning, because that was funny. And hilarity ensued. We just rolled with all the bad fortune that happened and celebrated the successes. And it was a very lighthearted thing. All told, I don't think anybody got gravely injured ever. There were a couple of wow moments, like the agent taking somebody out with a platter when it was convenient to do so because he was cheating. And he threw it like a discus and took out the person who was shining light in the Brute's eyes. And in the end, the lady pirate lost. And her crew was stunned. And she declared that, all right, he'd won. He could take his freedom. And she'd come back and she'd start arranging for the wedding. And he was like, what? And the crew's like, oh, no, you're fine. You've won. You are going to be the husband of the greatest lake pirate in Florin. So he kind of left in a daze. It was great. And then at the end, we got to a city and they got some role play and they got to solve a little mystery that I had. Because I didn't want to end too quickly. They discovered this heinous act that was going on in the city, and they thwarted it. Unrelated to the thing that they had going on. I probably could have related it to have it a more tight storyline, but it was somebody who was planning on doing bad things to this baron up in the northern city in Florin. So they got to work with this baron to have armed men, a military force, go up to help challenge these raiders who had a hideout fortress that they had built so they could raid all around the countryside and they could get to their boat. And well, they went off with the army and everything, and they ranged ahead and they had several adventures, and finally they were the first ones to get into the pirate stronghold. They got the great fight. Unfortunately, the person playing the fencer, who was supposed to be the foil of the lady raider, that didn't happen. So instead what I did was I solved the fight dramatically. As the players did better, so did the fencer. And when they had drawbacks, so did the fencer, falling off of something that he was striding on to give himself an advantage, or getting jostled by something. So the whole thing, they all eventually got to solve all of their crises at the same time. The farmhand found her betrothed, who also happened to be the guy that the Brute was looking for. and he was imprisoned with the pirate captain that the pirate was looking for to rescue his captain. And of course, this all led to the defeat of the Lady Raider, who let's just say what happened off camera, but the agent accomplished his mission, and everybody's happy. It was great. It was a comedy where they all got to do things. There was lots of laughing. I don't think I've laughed so hard in the middle of a game as we did for that. And I think people really enjoyed the fact that it felt like a movie. It took maybe 3.5 sessions? 3 sessions. No, it was only 3. And the action was fairly fast-paced. It was a lot of fun. And again, their comedy chops were getting stronger and stronger. They felt confident and knew, yeah, you moan when the dice turn against you and you turn it into something funny, and everybody kind of pitches in when those kind of things happen. It was, in a word, fantastic. And I don't need to run this again really soon because the setup did take a little while. The reading through was not too painful. Fate is fairly loose as far as the rule system. The rest of it was just talking about how to run comedy, which is the harder part. But we had a fantastic time for just a few sessions. Now remember, I did all the work. I came up with the adventure, I came up with the backgrounds, I came up with the players' characters, and then put that in motion, and they just took off with it. And it was great. And I think that's really kind of essential. If you're going to do this, you need to give the player something so they don't have to feel the slog of, I have to learn a new system, and I have to make a new character, and 3 sessions down, I'm not going to be playing this character anymore because that game will be over. That's rough, and I can see where a lot of people would quail at that, especially if you're going to some, totally outlandish system they've never tried before, or something with a lot of really crunchy rules or a lot to learn about the game. I would always make some sort of cheat sheets for the group if there are any kind of crunchy rules that they're going to need to refer to through the course of the game, and I would simplify a great deal and put that on me as the veteran game master, person trying to introduce them to the game, and then eventually let them take over certain concepts. Anything more than what you need to roll to resolve, what you need possibly for damage if that's an extra roll, that's all you need to know. The rest of it, I'll put on myself. I'll run those things from behind, and you guys can tell me how you do, and we'll just all celebrate together, successes and failures in equal measure. Then, since I was feeling so good about things, I thought that they deserved their taste of a real game. Something that was more than just a one-shot. It was at this time that we played Gooey Cube's The Darkest Dream, the first part of a long campaign called the Red Star Rising. And this one had pre-generated characters. All of them have their own backgrounds. All of them have their own little secrets. All of them have all the things they need to start out with, just about, except for a little fine-tuning that they had to do. But it was ready to go into the middle of the story. So again, we didn't need to do a great deal of anything complicated. As a matter of fact, they chose those characters at the end of, it was 3.5 sessions. At the end of The Princess Bride, I had all the characters ready and they made their choices, so that we were ready to go the next time. I had all the characters photocopied from the pre-generated sheets, so the masters are still mine. Actually, I didn't photocopy them. I have them all on PDF, because if you're going to get a PDF, you're going to do the Red Star Rising, get The Darkest Dream. It's got all those pre-generated characters, fantastic art, really good. And I'm not just saying that because I've worked for Gooey Cube in the past. It is really good. So, then we started running this game, right? This is 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, by the way. It is the new hotness, and I honestly believe it's one of the strongest versions of Dungeons & Dragons. I know it's got detractors, but it's always hip to grumble about the widest, biggest game out there. So, they started playing, and they had a wonderfully complicated little sandbox to go into, meeting lots of strange characters. But what I loved about it is after these initial preliminary games, these characters were deeper than anything they'd had before. They had their own personality, they had their own voice, they had their own purpose, and all of them were important and special in the world because they were all members of this. Think fantasy gypsies, you got a pretty good idea, with more mystical traditions, and they're more outcast even than the gypsies because many of them are afflicted with something called the blood touch, which gives them strange powers but often warps their appearance. They're really looked down on to the point of being hunted in some places. So several of the characters do have these blood touches, and as they're playing along, they find, of course, the reliance on each other, and also that they have people in the troop. They're family, and I was able to try to convey that all these strange faces and characteristics, that's their aunts and uncles of the camp as far as they're concerned. Most of them were adopted progeny or grew up with these people, so they really started to appreciate them as not just NPCs, but as family, which is exactly the kind of immersion you want in a game like GUI Cube. It doesn't hurt at all that there were these beautiful illustrations showing every step of the way what they were seeing, what they were doing. Again, the books are written so well that it's like you have this great story laid out in front of you, and it's just waiting for you to take your part in it, which they did, and they acted with aplomb. They made some great decisions. They got some cool loot, which all comes in these little cards, but they really loved those. I think all players generally love to get the loot, and having something like that was a really big plus. Plus, they have all these portrait cards, so when they're talking to an NPC, I can show them the characters that they're talking to. As well as, and I have to boast, because, as a game master, you want to kind of leave certain feelings from certain characters. And there are a few characters that stuck out as strongly as their hero, Smedley. Smedley is just an incidental character. He's actually the first character the players meet because they save him from a giant maddened bear. And since then, he has been hero-worshipping the group, and he keeps popping up and making them uncomfortable because now they got this little kid following around these adventurers. What soldier loves to have this little kid following them around in dangerous places? And, of course, I kind of twisted him and made him a little bit horrible, too. Like, he's incredibly sheltered, and his point of view is skewed to the player's kind of horror. But it's been a lot of fun. They had a great time. There was a little dungeon crawling in there, so they got to do some of that. They got to fight some new and exotic creatures for Xayathe, the world that the game takes place in, called arachnic revenants that are just ghastly and hideous. And they got to deal with common people and found out that, prejudice against their people is a real thing and not fun. And at the same time, they're bilking these people out of their money. So it's interesting when you're presented with a completely fresh perspective as they were. They really got to embrace it. They felt insulted when people insulted people of the troop. They got extremely protective of random stat blocks in any other game. Oh, the NPC died, that's a shame. No, nobody died on their watch. They took wounds, and they went out of their way to make sure that everybody from the Blue Veil troop, their home, made it out okay, even though they frequently put themselves out in danger, entertaining people and performing and stuff. They took care of things, and they did an admirable job. They knocked it out of the park. It was really good. But all good things come to an end, right? Eventually, that first chapter was finished. It took 5 or 6 sessions. It was lengthy. They really got to enjoy those characters. But then I knew it was time to switch to something else. For a bit, we would eventually come back to the Red Star Rising campaign. So I fell on a love of mine, Paranoia. This is the newest version from Mongoose Games, but I've always loved Paranoia. I've had the 2nd edition for ages, and I've tried to run it numerous times, and it always failed. Because my players didn't have any attachment to the characters, for one thing. They couldn't grasp any kind of attachment to these characters because it was kind of artificial and sterile. Your characters are clones. You've got a bunch of them. Random violence, haha. My characters might die from no fault of my own, so ho, woo. So a lot of times it just ended in pointless shootouts before I just close it up in disgust. So with this group, we made up characters. We made characters on purpose because character creation in this is a bit adversarial and set up the game nicely. Because when you pick something that your character is good at, the guy next to you is bad at it. Such a good idea. Mongoose really did a good job in crafting this game. They also simplified a lot of the concepts too to make it really easy to run. The system is very lightweight, which is good for something like Paranoia. Plus, they also had prop cards. All the stuff that you could carry, there's a card for it represented, so you didn't have, a stat sheet and everything. The character sheets were on whiteboard, which in first implying that, the characters are very temporary and can die easily is cute in theme. Doesn't work so good if you're not playing everything in one night. I'll just say that right now. I ended up having to print off character sheets to make that work. But while that was a thing, the players, again, created characters, and I saw them making personalities for these characters. Around their stats, yes. But again, they also took into account their secret societies, possible mutant powers. Some acted with bravado. I'm tough, I'm cool. Others acted as weasels and, sycophants. It was a wild success. It came off great. And to do this, I actually used a module that I've been holding on to for a long time. This was not actually a Mongoose published one. This was from back when West End Games had it. But it was Paranoia, Send in the Clones, which actually had singing moments. I got to sing. Feel sorry for the players a little bit, but it was fun. It was memorable. We had a great time. And yes, there was a point where everybody was shooting at each other. Because at one point they were faced with a moral dilemma. There was a kid who had shot at them with a gun, and one of the characters turned and tried shooting at him, and that's when I dropped on everybody, children are the future. The computer has told all of you that they are the cream of Alpha Complex, so young, so uncorrupted, and could you bring yourself to shoot one of them in the back as they're running? And Troubleshooter's like, sure can. As a matter of fact, I'm going to use an ability so not only can I shoot him, but my friend over there has a choice. He can get a free shot in on him, or he can shoot me. Well, he shot him. So the fight started from there, and it eventually wiped out all but 2 members of the group. So eventually everybody lost a clone through that whole thing. Everybody got a taste of it. It was a lot of fun. Some mutant powers got used. But in general, it's so fast-paced and wild. I think everybody had a fun time with it, and I think we're going to play that again. I've got a lot of adventures that came pre-packed with the core set, and I also have the sequel, Acute Paranoia, that also has even more adventures. So I'm really looking forward to being able to take another dip into Paranoia. It was so good getting that one knocked out finally. And then, what was the roar after that? We ran my game. Yes, I have written an adventure, and I've talked about it in this channel. A Strangely Gooey Holiday from Gooey Cube. This was in December of last year, so it was the holiday season, and we ran it, and it had a lot of fun. It was, it's okay. It's not a bad game. Some people have said it's great. I don't know. I have a hard time distancing myself because I'm the creator, so I'm not going to say it's fantastic. It is endearing and entertaining, and I think a little too full of combat. If I had to do it again, I would probably scale down some of the fighting, because there was a lot of fight after fight after fight after fight. Not what I prefer to do, but when you're handed a whole bunch of monsters to throw in, you've only got so much real estate. That's what they wanted, so that's what they got. But it was fun. They got rewarded, and it was another chance for them to slip back into those characters. I took the characters from The Darkest Dream, and they just continued to play the same characters. So they were thrown into this bizarre situation and made the most of it, having gotten through this fun little adventure. They didn't level up, but they got a couple of neat little magical items and more money. So we're using a milestone system to level, so they're still level 1. And then after Strangely Gooey, we went right into the Follows to Spirits, which is the second chapter of the Red Star Rising. So they got to continue with those characters and just kind of extended it along, which is really kind of fun. I'm pretty happy with the way things turned out there. And now we're doing Follows to Spirits again. So this is their payoff for taking a chance with me and doing all of these short games. And those are the techniques that I used to go through those in rapid sensation and not wear my players out. Don't exhaust them by making them learn whole new rule blocks. I'll take the burden of learning new rules, and I'll make a cheat sheet for you if you need to do things. I'll take the burden on making pre-generated characters and let you choose from them rather than force you to spend an entire night making pre-generated characters for a strange system if we've only got one manual. That's just painful. Now, there will be times where they will be making their own characters, and sometimes it may be for a more complicated game. Shadowrun, I'm looking at you. But all told, I think that the system really does work and allows you to expose your players to a range of different games to try, to grow, to maybe challenge themselves a little bit, to shake themselves out of a comfortable rut and look at the breadth and depth of games that are out there and available. Some of them with a completely different aspect from something they've probably ever seen before. And yes, my system is not easy. This was not a simple thing that every game master can do, and not every group of players will want to do this. As a matter of fact, what spurred this video on was I was watching some of the videos of somebody I enjoy very much, Puffin Forest, with his own channel on YouTube, and he talked about doing exactly this. He has this habit of going to game stores, like I do, and, oh, I don't have that one. That looks neat, and sometimes those games come home with him. Well, my weakness is half-price books, but yeah, he is the local game store, and yes, I do buy things from my local game store, too. You have to support the game stores, everybody. But he wanted to play some of those, much as I did. And he did the exact same thing, except he made the players make characters for all these games. And they ran it for a little while and switched on to something else, much like I did. He didn't like the experience, and the players seemed to rebel against certain games, possibly because of this fatigue that I'm talking about. And I think that the way that I did it really did help the players. It did help that the players were thirsty as heck. They want to play so badly. They love coming and playing. This is a group of casual players who are just like, oh, okay, if I show up, I show up. If I don't, something came up, oh well. No, they kind of bleed a little bit when they can't be here and they know that there's a game to play, which I'm blessed. Don't get me, I'm not taking them for granted. I have great players, fantastic players. Yeah, all of my players are fantastic in their own way. But the group that went through this with me, I couldn't do that with a lot of people, and I recognize them and I celebrate them, honestly. If this seems a little bit like boasting that I have players that can do that, for you game masters who haven't been so lucky to experience that, yeah, I'm glad to share the experiences, and I hope that someday you get a group of players who are so flexible and eager to play the game that you want to present for them that they jump on board. But this is how I did it. Patience, diligent work behind the scenes, more so than I often do for games, because I'm far too confident in my improv skills, and oftentimes I do skip on details. These I got better as a game master myself, exposing myself to all these games by working much harder than I ever have before at prep. Some skills that I have gone soft in. These games did me a world of good. I've read up and absorbed a number of books that were just sitting on my shelf, and now those are part of my game theory. And the practices that I've had doing some of these things have made me a better game master overall, even over the course of just this last year. Honestly, I've grown more in this last year with my experiences with GUI Cube, playing all of these games, being challenged by this new group of players, and also learning about some of the other players that I've had and learning how to run their games the way they like better, but still challenge them and make them grow. I'm better. I'm not the greatest game master in the world, and I'm still sometimes a little bit lazier than I should be in giving players the absolutely best, but I'm getting better. And that's what I wanted to share with you today. The how I did it is, I think, going to be useful for some of you, especially if you want a primer on how to set up short-term games, what kind of goes behind that, why use pre-generated characters, why use cheat sheets and things like that to help your players navigate through so that you can run more complicated games. As long as you have a good grasp of it as a game master, you can do a lot to help your players limp through. That's a subject for another video, though. But I'm really happy to have shared this with you. I'm very proud. I'm very proud of my players. And I'm very happy that this system has worked out as well as it has. My players are far better skills-wise, and we've all gotten to enjoy a nice buffet of some of the finer games that have come out. And there's a lot more on the horizon. We're not done. Once we're done with the Foulest of Spirits, we will take another sideline and do something else. And by the time we're done with the Red Star Rising campaign, up to the point that they've published, I have other games in mind. We will... spoiler alert! We're going to be getting very Star Wars-y fairly soon. So, thank you for joining me. I appreciate all of you. I hope this has entertained you because I really wanted to. I really do. And if anybody learned anything or you yourself, you want to try this and you have ideas or questions or anything, feel free to share. Either on my Dungeon Tutor Facebook group, I'd love to have that kind of a conversation, or in the comments here. I've been getting some comments a little bit more regularly. I love it. It's my meat and drink. The reason I do all of this is to talk with you and share these experiences. I love it dearly every time I check my messages and see somebody has left a comment. So thank you all, and I hope that you continue to leave comments and we can talk and rehash memories and all the good stuff that comes with gaming. But I am Rob the Dungeon Tutor, and until next time, next session, this one is over. Farewell and thanks for joining me.